Welcome to episode 45 of the Gambots podcast. I'm your host, Eric, and this is my co host.
It's Christian.
On tonight's episode, Christian watched the older television series Roswell. We both watched the documentary Secret of Blackmoor, The True History of D&D. I have some previews of Remnant from the Ashes, and World of Warcraft Classic was released this week. But first, Christian, this week you watched Roswell, and I've never actually heard of this show. What is the premise of it?
Well, it's old, like you said. It premiered in 1999. I was 9 years old when this TV show came out. Um, I didn't realize it was that old until this go around. I had watched it before in, like, say, 2009-ish, and it was already 10 years old by then, which I hadn't even realized. But no new movies have come out that I've wanted to see, and so in lieu of any of that, this has taken up like 99% of my media time in the past 2 or 3 weeks, so I decided I should probably talk about it. This is essentially Twilight before Twilight was a thing, and it's aliens instead of vampires.
Have you seen any of the Twilight movies?
Some of them, I watched about half of the first one, and then I watched the second one and the last one.
Do you see do you see inspiration that they've taken from it?
Yeah, so I don't know if I would say I don't know that Stephanie Meyer like watched Roswell and was like, "Oh, I can adapt this with vampires." But I mean, if I found out that she did, I would not be at all surprised. That they share a lot of similarities, and some of it, to be fair, is just like high school teen angst. I'm sure you could pick that out of basically any like CW show that you just picked at random, but yeah, like some of them are there's a lot of similarities.
What is the basic premise of the show?
So the basic plot is that in the pilot, the main character Liz Parker is shot by some random guy at the diner there she works at, and her classmate Max heals her with his secret alien powers, which then sparks like a romance, and she gets dragged in with her other human friends into a bunch of alien nonsense.
And so, is this just a one season completely told story, or do they stretch this out?
It is 3 seasons, and it is very up and down between the seasons in terms of quality and CGI and acting and writing, and yeah, there's some stuff that is just real stupid.
So, you said this came out in 1999. That is like right on, and you mentioned CGI. That is right on the cusp of just bad CGI. Is this movie dated?
It's pretty dated, so it's not necessarily the CGI, though that is a big part of it. We've definitely come a long way, but I think a lot of it is just technology that they use in the show. Like for the whole first season, there are so many plot points that could just be solved with a cell phone. Like there are a lot of problems where it's like, oh, so and so is missing. We haven't heard from them in 3 days. I guess like they must be in trouble. And I'm thinking like, text them, find out what's up. But it was before that. Then in season two, they have cell phones, some of them, and it's like emergency use only, and some of them are large. And now I'm most of the way through season three, and like I said, I've seen this before, so I know where it's going. I'm most of the way through season three now, and they've pretty much all have like flip phones at this point, but they're like a reasonable size.
That's something I've never thought about, but using not using the trope of being unable to find someone, you now actually have to write around that and explain why you can't just call or text them like writers have it slightly harder nowadays.
Yeah, there's a ton of parts in episode in yeah, there's a ton of points in season one where like they're like, oh, I wonder where Liz is, or I wonder where Maria is. Like, I guess we'll find out when she gets home. It's it's truly crazy to watch something like this 20 years later.
So you said it was broken into three seasons. Is it one overarching story, or does each season have its own plot that it's trying to develop?
Each season doesn't even have one plot. Like, it's each season has 2 to 3 arcs that it goes through. Like it runs through problems pretty quick, but these are also longer seasons. They're about 20-23 episodes as opposed to like the 8 to 10 that I'm used to now. Um
It,
Season 1 focuses primarily on avoiding the like sheriff of Roswell because he's suspicious of aliens for some reason, and then the FBI get involved. Then they find out that the four main aliens are half human clones of an extraterrestrial royal family that's been hidden on Earth for 50 some years, and they just like hatched 11 years ago.
how old are these kids? Are they teenagers?
Yeah, they come out of these little pods and they're like 6 years old, so they're like 17 now.
Huh. What about season two?
Season two's all over the place. They find another race of aliens that wear skin suits to look like people. Then they find another set of royal clones, so every all of the main aliens have like doppelgangers. Then one of the main characters dies towards the end of season two, and that is by far the most interesting like story arc of the whole show, which is good because season three is truly a mess. Like I said, I'm only halfway through it, and it is, my god, all over the place.
Do you think they just knew that they were getting canceled and didn't know how to end it, or do you think they were canceled because they were going all over the place?
I don't know. Like I could see it going either way. I could see them just throwing up their hands and being like, "We don't know what to do next." I meant to look to see if they were canceled or if they quit, but yeah, like I feel like in season two they were, at the end of season two they just kind of were like, I didn't expect to get renewed. What are we gonna do now?
When when you're describing season two, it reminds me of another '90s alien classic about warring alien races, Animorphs.
Oh man, I love the Animorphs.
Yeah, I never really watched the TV show, but I used to read the books.
The TV show wasn't good. The books are incredible. Like I read all 63 of them, and
Oh
like
my gosh, they have 63 books?
yep, and that's just main series. There's spin-offs and stuff too. They're great. Like they're bleak because at the end, like some of the characters have PTSD, and some of them are dead, and some of them like just can't cope with everything that they've done in the war. Like the Animorphs books are legit bleak.
Yeah, I read like a synopsis of them because I read them when I remember I read like the first one when it came out from like a Scholastic book fair or whatever, and then they just kept coming out and out, and it was just something I couldn't keep up with. When did the final book release? Were they releasing like 10 books a year or something? Because like that's insane. 63 books?
Yeah, the last one came out in 2001. They were releasing them 3 a year.
So are there any like big actors in this?
Um, yes and no. A lot of the people in Roswell went on to do kind of nothing. Brendan Fair is one of the characters. He was in a couple episodes of Bones. Um, the main character Liz is played by Sherry Appleby, and she's been in a number of shows since she was in a fun little show called Life Unexpected, and she was just in a show called Unreal that's like about reality television. The biggest name is Katherine Heigl. She's one of the aliens, and I mean, she's gone on to do all sorts of movies and TV shows.
Hmm.
One of the main reasons I got back into this more recently, honestly, is because they remade it just this year. There's a new show, I'm pretty sure on the CW, called Roswell, New Mexico, and they're both based on a young adult book series called Roswell High, which absolutely makes all the sense in the world to me because this show absolutely screams like YA, like teen angst novel.
Do you know if the remake is going to be similar to the original?
I thought it would. I got curious the other day and I googled the theme song and the intro because I like the intro to Roswell a lot, and they use the exact same song. It looks like just like a recreation of the original like intro video, just with the new actors and actresses. And so I was like, oh, cool. I might check this out and see how these new people do. The CW has episodes up on their website starting at the 6th one, And so I was like, I just watched season 1. I can jump back in at episode 6. And oh no, I was wrong. They went in a drastically different direction because the like previously on was like Isabel's a serial killer, and we're not sure why all these people keep dying. And I was just staring at it like, oh no, none of this is right.
Well, you know what happened, Christian, was the butterfly effect. They now have cell phones, and then things just went haywire.
That's right. They couldn't write themselves out of all those tricky situations.
Do you know how this critically has been received?
So the Rotten Tomatoes has nothing as far as critical reviews. It's just blank. The audience score is an 83%, and I gotta agree. It's appealing in a way that I can't really articulate very well. It scratches a particular itch. And maybe it's just because I watched this like ten years ago or so, and so like it's just nostalgic for me, but this is 100% probably my guiltiest pleasure. When I saw it was on Hulu, like I honestly gasped because I loaned my first season DVD set to somebody like 7 years ago and never got it back.
So I'm guessing you will recommend our audience check this one out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very strange and it's not super good, but it does scratch a specific itch.
This week, both Christian and I watched A Secret of Blackmoor, the true history of Dungeons and Dragons. Uh, I'm not going to lie, Christian, I was pretty excited to check this one out. I read an article on it from Kotaku, and they've been doing a couple of these. They did one about Gary Gygax's wife, and this looked really interesting. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little disappointed by it.
Yeah, this was pretty dry. Like this was pretty. I don't want to say inaccessible because people would understand it. I just don't think anyone would enjoy it.
Yeah, this is definitely for the. I don't even know if it's for the hardcore Dungeons and Dragons fans. I think it's for fans of like board or not board game, but role playing game history. I think more so.
It's a very specific and not very large group of people.
The basic premises of this documentary is it wants to give credit to David Arneson, who is generally recognized as one of the co-creators of Dungeons and Dragons, and really highlight what he brought to the table with Gary Gygax, because Gygax and the legacy I think of popular knowledge right now is that Gygax did all of this himself. And there's been a little bit of pushback from the non-Gygax camp in recent years to try and say, like, no, everything he did was an evolution and they just built upon older games. And to explain this, they go in depth about every major strategy war game that eventually led to Dungeons and Dragons, and that's where the dryness comes from.
Yeah, it is sprawling.
Yeah. So I never looked too much into the history of D&D, and I never realized that it actually sprung from war games. I had no idea what war games were, and they look insane.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So you guys need, if you're listening, you need to look up pictures of it, but it's essentially they would play on ping pong sized tables. They would have hundreds of miniatures of basically army men, or I think they did a lot of Napoleonic War stuff, so it's miniatures they painted, and they would just have armies fight each other, and they would just be creating rules about, if you're this far, your bullets do whatever damage, and they use dice to determine outcomes of it, and you had commanders and stuff. Like, it looks crazy.
Yeah, I was really surprised. Like I this is something I hadn't really put a lot of thought into. I had never really considered what the history of this game was. And yeah, I'm really surprised by what I found.
Yeah, and what I think is the most interesting about any of this is wargaming, I guess, was a pretty big thing back in the 60s. It maybe not huge, but a lot that they had clubs and stuff for it and would send around newsletters. Almost every serious person who started developing games based it off of a book from 1880 called Strategos, and it's like the backbone of all these games rules, and really to some extent I think the rules of, or at least some of the ideas of the rules behind Dungeons and Dragons, which is crazy because the book was 80 years old at that point.
So I'm not gonna lie, I was zoning in and out on this for a little bit because it, like we said, it's pretty dry. And for a while, thought they were talking about the board game Stratego, and I was like, I did not know how old this game was. And then I started thinking, like, how did they make Dungeons and Dragons out of this? And then I had to go back and watch a bit again. I was like, oh no, 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 I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, when they first said that, I was like, "Oh, is this what Stratego developed into?" But totally not, totally not. It's like a 300-page rule book for wargaming. But so some of the things that came out of, they do a really good job of explaining the evolution from different games that people created, and some of the things that came out from these war games that had not really been there before. There's the idea of the referee, now called the dungeon master, where two people would complain and say this should happen or this should happen, and the referee was expected to know the rules and make calls on that. They had basically, when they started creating more complex games, they had the fog of war. So like a player would go into another room, tell the referee what he wanted to do, then the other player would go. So they never actually really knew what the other players were doing. So that's kind of like the idea. You don't know what's going on in the world around you, only what you can see in Dungeons and Dragons. I thought this was crazy. Like the people would get attached to their generals and stuff, and if they got injured, they would cut off legs and give them eye patches and everything. That was really cool, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, they were talking about like pre-referee stuff, and I playing without a referee or a GM sounds like absolute chaos. Where like nobody had like a fixed set of rules. They were all just like, oh, we're gonna do whatever we think that we're gonna do, and then got into big fights about it.
Yeah. And I think if you're not going to be able to watch clips of this movie, but if somewhere down the road you can find a clip, I think the best part of this movie is when they are talking about this guy named Dave Wesley who created a game called Bronstein. And it's just basically him talking about the first game of Bronstein, and you can see that's where Dungeons and Dragons is coming from. So
Yeah.
basically, this is where wargaming transitioned to be more of an RPG and social game. This guy, Dave Wesley, gave essentially roles to everyone who showed up. Like, there's a mayor, there's a spy, there's a bookseller, there's a militia commander, and then it wasn't a zero sum game where they were fighting each other. Each one of them had hidden objectives, and so they were trying to accomplish it. And his idea was they would each come into his office and tell him, "Hey, I'm doing this," and then he would control it. But then while he was in the office, they were out there making their own deals, and it eventually led to a duel, which he was not expecting at all.
Yeah, that was probably my favorite bit as well. Like I found it interesting that he wasn't in the room at all times. Like he had his own little space that he went off to, because they said, and like I had the thought immediately what they said, which is like he lost control of the game right away. Like if the person running the game isn't present, that's not going to work. But yeah, those two guys went off and they they made their own thing and then got into a fight about it. So they walked back in and said, "Oh, you know, we need rules for how to do a duel because I want to shoot this guy."
Yeah, and that is what was cool about I think it was Strategos, but essentially their idea was if anything can happen, you can try it. It just might not occur. Which if you've played D&D, that's you start rolling to see if this happens or not. I thought
Yeah.
that was a cool concept. And then Arneson was at that game, and he eventually took it into creating the game called Blackmoor, which really threw the rule book out the window, and it was almost 100% role playing. Where he created the medieval fantasy world. He did this, and then people were just running around doing whatever. And what this documentary I think really lacked was they didn't really explain Blackmore that much. I had a really good understanding of what Bronstein was,
Yeah.
and David Wesley's what he did. An hour and 40 minutes of this movie was dedicated to wargaming. The last 20 to 30 minutes was dedicated sort of to Blackmore. Like, I know way more about the wargaming now than I do actually about Blackmore.
Oh yeah, agree. like I thought it was gonna be like one third precursor, one third Blackmoor, and one third like how Blackmoor evolved into D&D and like how D&D evolved into what it is today. And it was, yeah, like you said, almost 75% lead up to Blackmoor and then like not really much after that.
And really, for being a documentary about Arneson, not a lot about him either, or any,
Yep.
except for the Blackmore part. They had a huge amount on David Wesley.
Yeah. Yeah, like the game that he was describing it sounded like D&D. So like I think my chief problem with this documentary is I mean, I didn't really like it. um but the I think the chief problem I had was at the beginning they're talking about like the personal history. They're talking about, who invented the role-playing game. And I was like, this is interesting. But I think I was more interested in the history of the game itself and how it changed over time. And then they started talking about that, and I was like, yeah, I'm not really interested in this either.
Yeah, so they like left bits and pieces where you're like, okay, I see how this works. So D&D, at least the first edition, or whatever, their first release of it by Gygax and Arneson, seemed to be a combination of the ideas of Blackmoor, which was the open, sprawling role playing portion where you say I do this. It's entirely verbal, and then maybe you have the pen and paper to draw some stuff. The game Dungeon, which they touched on briefly, I'm not really sure how it was related to it, except that you explore dungeons. And then the what Gygax created was this either game or rule set called Chainmail, which were essentially which were the first Dungeons and Dragons attempts at creating rules for how you roll dice and what happens and whatnot. So really, it seems like it was a combination of Chainmail and Blackmoor to me, but I don't know really what Dungeon is. But that was kind of glossed over, and I wish they explained that more because then it explains why Arneson and Gygax seemed so bitter with each other at the beginning of when they talked about it at the beginning of the documentary because Gygax essentially froze Arneson out. And I think if all this is true, Arneson's creation and implementation of having the open world entirely role playing game portion was the more important part than the rule set because someone else could have come up with the rule set.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. What I was expecting from this documentary at first was basically how did D&D come to be D&D? Like, where did all the lore come from? Where did all the rules come from? And like, it kind of ducked into the rules, but as far as like the stuff that I associate with D&D, stuff like the Dragonlands and Ravenloft and the Underdark, I never heard any of that stuff get mentioned, so I still don't really know where any of that stuff came from.
I think that's Gygax. So if you're interested in that, I think you'll need to look up like a documentary or a story on him because I know he did a lot of the monster stuff and he was heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings, where I
Mm.
think they're trying to give Arneson like some credit, but you're right. I don't. It's hard to tell how much he actually fleshed out, but this was a really technical documentary, which is a weird thing to say because I don't necessarily know how to explain what a technical documentary is. But this goes deep into rule sets of games that have a lot of minutia.
Yeah, and like games you've never heard of.
Yeah, that don't seem to exist anymore.
Yeah, like I think playing a war game would be cool. I would definitely get into doing like a D&D that was just about the Napoleonic Wars or the Civil War or like anything like that, just where you can role play like an actual general. Like I think that would be neat.
Yeah, and I also like I agree. I don't know who we would have to teach us that, or we'd have to figure out the rules ourselves. I also like the idea of like playing a game like Bronstein where you're just assigned a role and then everyone's secretly doing stuff. That sounds pretty awesome to me.
Yeah, see that sounds like variations or like a prototype for like the more casual versions of games like that we have now, uh, uh like One Night Ultimate Werewolf, where it's not really role play, but you just get assigned a role and you have to commit to it and like make people believe that it's what you have. So I can see kind of an evolution there, but like we've skipped a bunch of steps and we've made it much more casual than like a D&D setting.
Yeah. So my personal stance on this is I do think I'm a bigger fan of like the role playing side of D&D and not necessarily the rules side. Uh, and I do enjoy the games where they explain it and you don't have grids and it's like, okay, I'm moving. This is 5 feet and this can hit blah blah blah. I like when you have like a good dungeon master who can explain that. So I do appreciate Arneson's what Arneson brought to the table, but I still feel like Gygax had a very important role to play as well, and I don't think they were trying to. It felt like they were trying to diminish Gygax a little bit, but really it seemed like it was a collaborative effort.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I do think I tend towards a more rule based because I like to know how things work, and I like structure a little more than just like going wild. But when they start talking about in the documentary about we're experimenting with like players having complete agency over their own characters, that sounds a lot more like the D&D games that I'm familiar with. Because even though I like structure and rules, the people that I play with don't necessarily, and we have done some truly wild stuff in some of these games.
Yeah, and that's what I think makes the D&D games memorable, is that, or if you have like a really close battle or something. And I've only played with a couple DMs, so maybe if you have like a world class DM, it's entirely different. But even like novice DMs, they've done a really good job. I've always had fun playing D&D, so if anyone hasn't played it, I would suggest testing it out at least.
Yeah, the DM I play with has been doing this for like 25 years. So we play second edition. We play Advanced Dungeons and
Oh
Dragons
wow,
second edition because that's what he's played his whole life, and like he knows it cover to cover.
man, that is an old edition.
Yeah, but like we have gotten into some crazy stuff. There was a session that they played before I joined where like they accidentally destroyed half the world. We were trying to cross a lake, and the one character polymorphed his horse into a dolphin and threw him in to try and ride. But the lake was made of acid, so the dolphin just started screaming and died. So it's gone off the rails pretty quickly.
So, would you suggest our audience check out this documentary?
No,
I
no,
would. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, like you said, unless you are real hardcore into role playing games and are really interested in the evolution of the mechanics of the game as it's gone from iteration to iteration, this is not going to be for you.
Yeah, it pains me to say, but I would not recommend it either. Also, it doesn't help is I think it's screening right now, but you can rent it from Vimeo for like $6, and it's not worth the $6. If
No,
you are really really interested in this stuff, I would check out the article that's on Kotaku. That's a little bit about the movie and a little bit more about Arneson. And honestly, it's like a maybe a 20-minute read. You'll get a fair bit of the story from that, and if you're really really interested, then go for the movie. But I think the reading the article is probably the better route for this.
agreed. All right, so Eric, this week you started playing Remnant from the Ashes. What are your opening opinions on this one?
Honestly, this game is really cool. It came out of nowhere. I had not heard anything about it. None of the podcasts I listened to had talked about it. And then all of a sudden, on different websites, I started seeing it pop up like, hey, check out this game. This game's like Dark Souls with guns, blah, blah, blah. And I saw it on the PlayStation Store, and I eventually looked into it more and was like, this is a game that I could get into. And I put about 3 hours into it Friday night, and it was a blast.
That's awesome. So what's the main story or what's the main drive behind this one?
So, from what I can tell so far, is the main idea is you play as a character who's on a quest of some sort to reach a tower, but for whatever reason, he ends up into this post-apocalyptic city that's being overrun by demons on what I am assuming is Earth, but I'm not entirely sure. and then you set out to help the settlement of survivors that basically pulled you in from being injured, and then you're trying to continue your quest, I guess. So right now I'm only in the first area. I'm running through like a city, and it's pretty cool. I like the aesthetic. The demon designs have been pretty cool as well.
Is it similar to anything else that you've played?
So this is a weird one to answer because everything I had originally saw on it was basically describing it as Dark Souls with guns or a Soulsborne game with guns. And I totally get where they're coming from on that. So when you think about like what is a Dark Souls style game, the first thing I think of because I played Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 and some of Bloodborne is that it like describes a progression system where if you die, you basically lose all of your experience and you have to get back to that point or to get it back where if you die again, you go back to zero. And that doesn't exist on this one. It's like a normal game where if you die, you get everything that you had collected when you went to that point. But the actual like layout of the interface is very Dark Souls like. For example, the directional buttons are you it use in Dark Souls and this one you use the directional buttons to use items in the real world. You have stamina management in this one, which makes more sense, I think, in Dark Souls because you're swinging swords around. In this one, you don't use stamina shooting guns, but like to roll or run, you use stamina. There's no pausing. There are really tough bosses, and if you're not careful, normal enemies can kill you really quickly. And there's like a main hub area and like a campfire slash rune system that you have in Dark. You have campfires in Dark Souls. You have runes here, so that's similar. But I think it's I think it's more different though because, like I said, when you die, it's not really a penalty other than having to run the level again. And the biggest difference, which I actually find this the most, this is what I find most annoying about the game is when you're fighting a boss, they actually have minions with them. So minion management is part of the game, which I do not enjoy at all. I think just fighting the bosses would be fun on its own, and there was one boss when I went into another person's world to try and help them. I was completely useless. Like I would run into the level and die within like 30 seconds. So after a couple tries, I just left because I was bringing this person down. And part of it is you need to dodge the boss because two hits could kill you, but then you just run into minions who are just going to kill you as well. So I was not prepared for that. So I need to mentally be like, okay, I have to manage other enemies as well and not just the bosses. Because it is a third person shooter, I think the idea is you could just stand across the area and shoot the boss and it would be kind of cheap. I think you can get around it with good game design, but I'm sure they tried everything and they found this to be the best way. But yeah.
It's a third person shooter, so is it basically just that, or are there other weapons? Are there other ways that you can like customize your character, get more specialties, or is it just shooting?
So you primarily it is shooting. You get a melee attack, which is another thing I don't like. Is your melee is R2 on the PlayStation controller, and to shoot you need to look down scopes and then hit R2. So sometimes if you're trying to shoot from the hip, I end up using my melee weapon at a range that's not going to hit anything. So that is annoying. But it is primarily shooting. You have melee, but then what's really cool about this one is you can customize your gun with like an augment, so you can have special abilities that charge up when you either deal damage or kill enemies. I haven't been able to figure out which one it is yet. And so you can hit R1 and then you'll like drop like a healing area where it'll heal you and all of your teammates, or you can basically shoot fire bullets that'll cause burn damage to enemies over time or things like that. So that is a really cool part of the game as well.
Nice.
Um,
So, based on what you've seen so far, is this going to be a recommendation?
It's a recommendation, I think, if you like challenging games. I went into this thinking, I'll be able to handle it. I'm not horrible at Dark Souls. I'm definitely not one of the best, but I think this is harder than Dark Souls because of the minion management. if they didn't have that, I would wholeheartedly recommend this because I actually think the regular levels are pretty cool. They do this weird thing where it's not completely procedurally generated, but they procedurally generate like tracks. So when you play through the game once, you might not fight all the same bosses as if you played through again or you played through your friend played through it. So you'll run into different parts, which Dark Souls had like handcrafted worlds which are beautiful. So that's I think gives some replayability, but and still it like the levels are cool and I think the enemies are fun to kill. It's just really if you get frustrated easily, I wouldn't suggest it, but if that won't deter you, the game feels really good.
Well, I get frustrated with games very easily, so I'm probably going to steer clear of this one.
Yeah.
All right, and also this week you took a first look at the new World of Warcraft Classic. So how's this one looking?
Oh man, Christian, I thought I was going to be locked into Remnant for like the next month, and then the next day I was like, I'm going to try WoW Classic. I had some friends talking about it, and oh my gosh, there's a reason people used to call this game World of Warcraft.
Hmm.
So the what World of Warcraft Classic is, Blizzard Blizzard has been getting a lot of requests by fans to essentially release what's called Vanilla WoW, which was the original version of World of Warcraft back in the mid 2000s. It's before any of the expansions, and it is before any of the gameplay tweaks. So the game is 100 times more tedious, but for whatever reason, I like the tedium in it, and I think it's part of its charm and it's fun. Like they don't put markers where you need to go for quests. You actually need to decipher what the people say and then look at a map to find out where you're supposed to go.
Oh boy.
And you have to
Yeah.
run everywhere. There is one item that you can use to fast travel back to your home base, but otherwise like you are running.
Oh man, that is tedious. I've
Yeah.
seen this advertised, I think, mostly just on Hulu between Roswell segments. uh, but I was curious as to what World of Warcraft craft. I was curious as to what World of Warcraft Classic meant. I was assuming they were just re-releasing, like yeah, like you said, like the first go, but I couldn't imagine why anyone would have wanted that now, like this far down the line.
Yeah, this is entirely for I think old time fans because those are the people who've been clamoring for it. Those people have been playing on private servers for years. Actually, the first time I ever played World of Warcraft was a couple years ago because there was like a pirate server going on. And it was free. It was called Elysium, and my friend was like, "Hey, check this out." So I did. And it was like pretty fun, but it's also on a private pirated server, so it wasn't ideal. It had a lot of issues, but it's cool, man. Like not even being a big gamer from back in the day, I always wanted to play, but my family didn't have like a computer that could run it, so I was never able to play it. So I'm glad to finally get to experience. I'm currently running a Gnome Warlock, and it's been fun.
Yeah, I mean the computer capable of running it was a handicap that I had never really considered. I think the biggest handicap for me was that I didn't want to pay a monthly fee for a game.
Yeah.
Is there a monthly fee on this one?
Yeah, so that is a sticking point for me, and it's why I don't know if I'll be playing it for more than a month or two. You at one point you could get a deal where you would pay $60 and you would have gotten X number of months free and some downloadable stuff. So how Classic works is it's $15 a month if you just want to pay for
Mm.
1 month, and then it's a little bit cheaper if you want to pay for 3 months, and then a little bit cheaper still if you want to pay 6 months in advance. And what you're actually doing is subscribing to it's called like Retail World of Warcraft, the Battle for Azeroth. It's like the modern one. You're paying for that, and World of Warcraft Classic is just like a side benefit for subscribing to that.
Mm.
So if you and I think their idea is like if you end up liking it and then you want to have more modern advances like fast travel, then you people would switch over. But right now, yes, there is a monthly subscription for it.
Yeah, uh, I was hoping that for a game that was 15 years old that they're re-releasing that it wouldn't have a monthly fee if it was just the classic version.
Yeah, apparently they put a lot of work into get it up and running. I get from what I've heard on message boards and stuff. But yeah, I was hoping that there would be some form of free trial on it, but there was not.
Yeah, I mean, I'd even do like a one time. Like, I'm not saying I want it absolutely for free. But I would have no problem paying like $40 because I mean that's what I'm gonna pay for a semi new game anyway. I'd pay $40 for like a license for it, but yeah, monthly is that's almost always a deal breaker for me for a game.
Yeah, usually it is for me, but just because there's been so much hype with this and I wanted to be part of it, I was like, I'll give it a month. I don't feel that bad if it's only a month, especially because so far I probably put 9 hours into it this weekend.
Yeah.
I am getting my money's worth, but this is not a game I see myself playing long term.
Yeah, I don't know how many people would.
So I bet some people will if the servers stay busy. Like they created their own private servers for 14 yeah, about 14 years now. So
That's true.
I assume they're going to have an initial burst of people. Everyone's excited about it, and then once everyone hits level cap 60, I'm curious if interest will fall off or people will continue playing it. I know there will be some people who fall off, but I don't know if people will continue playing or not because from what everything I've heard is like I have not heard about World of Warcraft or anyone excited about it since before 2010. This is the first time I've heard people like excited about the game, which is good publicity for Blizzard.
Yeah, really.
I mean, you said you saw it on Hulu commercials, which I mean, when's the last time you can say that?
The last time I genuinely remember seeing WoW advertisements was outside of a video game store, and it was for the like Kung Fu Panda extension.
Yeah,
And that was I don't know, probably 7 or 8 years ago, maybe more.
it was when video game stores still sold PC games.
Yeah, yeah. So that'll tell you.
All right, now it's time for our Amazon review game. Just a quick recap on this one. I am going to read a 5-star Amazon review on a movie, and then Christian is going to get 2 yes or no questions to help him guess what it is. And then he can take a guess on the movie or he can request another review. I will then read another Amazon review. Christian will get 2 more yes or no questions, and he can guess if he wants, or he can get a third review, 2 more yes or no questions, and then he has to guess. If he gets it on the first review, he gets 3 points. Second review, 2 points. Third review, 1 point, and we are keeping score for the year. Christian, are you ready?
I'm ready.
This is one of the best movies of the 90s. Sure, there's some cheesy moments, but still, it's the 90s. Great story and plot. Love how they came up with comparing the human race to a virus. That was genius. I only saw this once before when I was a child. Now I understand it more.
Ooh. Well, they just did that in the Godzilla movie. Is this a sci-fi movie?
I would say it's an unconventional sci-fi. It's a non-traditional sci-fi movie.
Is this an animated movie?
No.
Okay. Then I need a new review.
Okay. I can literally watch this movie over and over and over and over and over again. The subliminal messaging in it speaks so much truth about the world we live in. Quote, "It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth that you are a slave. You live in a prison that you cannot see, smell, taste, or touch. Truer words have never been spoken."
Oh, I've got to guess. Does this movie have Keanu Reeves?
Yes.
Is this the first Matrix?
This is the first Matrix.
All right. Fun
All right.
fact. I have never seen any of the Matrix movies.
Really?
It's a huge blind spot for me, and I keep meaning to rectify it, especially now that they said there's going to be a fourth one.
Man, dude, because you like Keanu, I thought you would have saw that one.
Yeah, I don't know if I just wasn't into sci-fi as much when they came out, or I didn't think they were good or what, but I know I never watched them, and so much time has passed now that like I said, I keep meaning to fill that blind spot, but I just haven't yet.
So the first Matrix is awesome and I think still holds up. Two and three I never thought were very good. And it's funny you asked about if it's animated because there's also the Animatrix, which half of it's pretty cool and then half of it's not very cool.
Yeah, I don't. When you said about viruses, I don't know why I was like, "Is this Osmosis Jones?"
I mean, yeah,
And then you said unconventional sci-fi. I'm like, I could be Osmosis Jones. Um, yeah, for somebody who loves movies and has worked at a theater for as long as I have, I have a lot of weird blind spots for movies. I've never seen this one. I've never seen The Goonies. There's a lot of movies that a lot of people consider to be classics that I've just breezed right through.
oh, well, maybe someday.
Yeah.
All right, before we head out, Christian, what are you going to be checking out this week?
Well, we're finally getting new movies. It comes out this week. It Chapter 2, which I'm moderately excited about. I really like the first one a lot, and I love the original from 1990. Um, I'm only a little excited. I'm not as excited for this one as I was for Chapter 1, because I've always thought the adult story was the weaker of the two parts. So we'll see. A lot of the actors and actresses are pretty good, so yeah, you never know. Um, I'm also probably going to watch the second season of Mindhunter on Netflix. I've been putting it off, but I need to get to it. Uh, Other than that, probably not much in the way of video games. I'm going to be sanding and refinishing my living room floor, so I think my video game area is going to get upended for the week.
So this week, I am going to be playing probably World of Warcraft every night. I got to get my month in because I could see this game taking over my life. That's pretty much all I got on my slate. It was nice. I had a free weekend, so I was able to relax, and I have another free weekend next weekend. So I might try and go to the movies this week or something like that. But otherwise, we just got to pick out a. I'll be watching whatever it is we decide to talk about next week.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks for listening to our episode. If you'd like to give us a suggestion for the Amazon review game or just reach us, we are gambots.blog@gmail.com, or you can reach us on Twitter. We are at Gambots Network. If you like what you've heard, please rate us on whatever you're listening to if you're able to. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you.